The fog was so thick that morning it felt like the land had disappeared. Caleb Walker rode the fence line the same way he had for years, slow and quiet, letting his horse choose the path while he checked posts and wire. Wyoming mornings had their own sound. Wind sliding through sage, leather creaking, hooves pressing into frozen ground. It was the kind of silence that let a man forget things if he stayed in it long enough. He saw her where the fence dipped toward a shallow draw. At first he thought it was trash caught by the wind, maybe an old tarp. Then the shape lifted its head. Too small. Too alive. Caleb pulled the reins and stopped. A filly stood tied to the fence. A young one, light bay coat dulled by dust and cold. A rope looped tight around her neck and knotted to a sun-bleached post. Her legs shook in short, tired tremors. She wasn't fighting the rope anymore. Whatever panic had burned through her earlier was already gone. All that was left was waiting. Caleb stayed where he was. He had learned not to rush toward things that looked broken. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of snow from the high ridges. It lifted a scrap of paper nailed to the fence post. The paper slapped softly against the wood. Caleb swung down from the saddle and stepped closer. The filly watched him with one dark, wet eye, not wild, just worn out. The paper was torn from a notebook, uneven edges, ink smeared like the writer's hand had shaken. The words were short. "Please don't untie her unless you mean to keep her." Caleb read it once, then again. The words settled into him like cold slipping past wool and denim. It wasn't the rope holding the filly there. It was that sentence. A line drawn by someone who had already walked away. He folded the note carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. The filly lowered her head. The rope creaked as she shifted. The hair beneath it was rubbed thin and raw. No blood, no obvious wounds, just the look of something left behind. Caleb took another step. She flinched but didn't bolt. The fence held her. Caleb stopped again, hands loose at his sides. He had a knife in his pocket, one clean cut, and she would be free. He could ride on, say he never saw her. Out here, that kind of freedom was easy. For a moment, the fog faded and another memory rose up instead. White noise. Snow falling too fast. The ground giving way. A voice calling his name and then vanishing under wind and stone. Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them, the filly was still there. She met his gaze. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with fear. It was recognition, not of sameness, but of absence. The knowing look of something left where the world could decide its fate. "All right," Caleb said aloud, his voice rough from disuse. He knelt in the frozen dirt and brought the knife to the rope. The filly stiffened. "It's okay," he said, though he wasn't sure who the words were for. The rope parted with a soft sound and fell useless to the ground. The filly didn't run. She stood there, free, breathing hard, eyes wide, waiting as if freedom itself was a trap. Caleb stood slowly. He didn't touch her. He didn't lead her away. He just stayed where he was until her breathing eased. He mounted his horse and turned toward home. He expected her to stay behind. She didn't. By the time he reached the gate at the edge of his land, he could feel her presence. Not close, just enough. A quiet following. Not loyalty, just a choice. Caleb's ranch sat low against the wind. A small house, a barn, fences kept tight and clean. Nothing extra, nothing kept that didn't serve a purpose. That was how he lived now. Efficient, distant. He tied his horse and turned. The filly stood at the edge of the yard, unsure. Caleb busied himself with chores he didn't need to do yet. Straightening boards. Checking latches. The house behind him held no photographs. No keepsakes. After the accident, memory had become something dangerous. "Water's there," he said, nodding to the trough. She didn't move. He set feed down a few yards away and stepped back. Minutes passed. Finally, she approached and ate, slow and careful. The sound was small, but it cut through the quiet. Caleb leaned against the fence and closed his eyes. That night, the wind rose. The temperature dropped. Clouds stacked low and heavy over the mountains. Caleb felt it in his bones before he saw it in the sky. By morning, the blizzard came hard. Snow slammed sideways across the land. Visibility vanished. Caleb stepped outside to secure the pen when his footing slipped on hidden ice. The ground dropped out from under him, and he went down hard. The world turned white and loud. He tried to get up. His arms failed him. Panic surged, fast and familiar. Somewhere ahead, the filly reached the fence line and stopped. The storm roared around her, pulling old fear to the surface. She reared once, then froze. Caleb lay half-buried, breath shallow, vision narrowing. Then he felt the ground shake. Hooves. Close. The filly stood over him, snow clinging to her mane. She looked from him to the open land and back again. The storm urged her to run. She didn't. She pressed her body against his, blocking the wind, warm, solid. Then she tugged at his jacket with her teeth and pulled. Inch by inch, she dragged him toward shelter. Caleb gasped, clinging to her mane as he found his footing again. Together they reached the rise where the wind eased. They stood there, shaking, alive. The storm still raged, but it no longer owned them. Caleb rested his forehead against her neck, breath steaming in the cold. The rope was gone, and nothing in either of their lives would ever be simple again. The storm left, the land changed. Snow lay deep across the ranch, softening every sharp edge and burying old tracks. Caleb woke with his body aching in places he had learned to ignore, but the panic from the blizzard was gone. The barn was quiet, except for the slow, steady sound of breathing. The filly stood a few steps away from him, head low, eyes alert. She had not wandered far during the night. That alone told him something had shifted. Animals that wanted to leave always did. She had stayed. Caleb pushed himself upright, testing his weight carefully. The pain was real, but manageable. He reached for the fence rail and stood. The filly shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his arm, steady, as if she had decided that balance was now a shared thing. "I'm all right," he said quietly. They stepped out into the morning together. The ranch looked smaller under snow, quieter, like it was holding its breath. Caleb checked the fences, moving slow. One section near the north pasture had gone down under the weight of ice. He marked it in his head. Repairs would come later. By mid-morning, a truck appeared on the road. Caleb stiffened out of habit. Visitors were rare, and never welcome without warning. The truck pulled into the drive and stopped near the house. A woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, coat zipped tight against the cold. She looked from the barn to the pasture, then to the filly standing close at Caleb's side. "Mr. Walker?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Linda Perez, County Animal Services. We received a report about a young horse tied to a fence out here." Caleb nodded once. "She's safe." Linda studied the filly, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She noted the faded rope mark, the careful way the filly held herself. "I'm not here to take her today," Linda said, "but I need to understand what your plan is." Caleb looked at the filly. She met his gaze and didn't move away. "I'm caring for her," he said. "Food, shelter, vet's been contacted." Linda wrote something down. "Until ownership is determined, she's considered abandoned livestock." The word settled heavy in the cold air. "I won't let her go back to whoever did that," Caleb said evenly. Linda met his eyes. "That may not be your choice alone." They walked the property together. Linda asked questions. Caleb answered only what was needed. When she left, she handed him a card. "Thursday," she said. "County office. Come in." After the truck disappeared, the ranch felt louder somehow. Caleb stood still for a long moment, then turned back to the barn. The filly followed without hesitation. Over the next days, Caleb worked quietly. He reinforced the pen, laid fresh hay, fixed the worst of the fencing. The filly stayed near him, not touching, not hiding. She learned the shape of the place the same way he had years ago, by walking it, by listening. Sarah McKenna arrived on the third day. She checked the filly carefully, her movements calm and slow. The filly tolerated it, tense but steady. She's been through more than one bad hand, Sarah said, but she's strong, and she trusts you more than she should by now. Caleb didn't answer. Trust wasn't something he felt ready to claim. That night, the wind picked up again. Not a blizzard this time, but enough to rattle tin and stir memory. Caleb sat on the porch and watched the barn lights glow faintly against the dark. The filly stood inside the pen, her shape easy to find even in low light. "You don't owe me anything," he said into the wind. She stayed anyway. On the fourth morning, Caleb noticed the mark on her neck had softened, the raw edge fading. He approached slowly and stopped when she tensed. He held his hand out and waited. Time stretched thin. Finally, she lowered her head, just enough for his fingers to brush her coat. The contact hit him harder than the storm had. He pulled his hand back almost immediately. "That's enough for today," he said. Later that afternoon, a neighbor's truck rolled past on the road. The filly lifted her head sharply, body coiling. Caleb felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Attention had a way of bringing questions, and questions had consequences. That evening, he burned the old rope in the barrel behind the barn. The fibers caught slow, smoke lifting thin and gray into the sky. The filly watched from a distance, ears forward, not afraid. The days settled into a fragile rhythm. Feed, water, repairs, quiet. The filly followed at a careful distance, sometimes disappearing over the rise, always returning. One evening, as the light turned gold across the pasture, she stepped closer than ever before. Her shadow overlapped his. Caleb noticed how her coat had begun to shine beneath the dust, how her eyes no longer looked empty. "You've got a way of bending without breaking," he said softly. The name came before he could stop it. Willow? The word felt heavy and real. He waited for regret. It didn't come. 2 days later, Sarah returned with paperwork and a serious look. "County will be back," she said. "Visibility brings process." Caleb nodded. "I'll be there Thursday." That night, the sky darkened fast. Clouds rolled in low and heavy. Caleb felt the warning in his bones again. He secured the pen and stayed close. When the snow started, it came harder than expected. Willow panicked. She bolted toward the far fence, the one near the draw. Caleb ran after her, pain screaming through his side. His boot caught hidden ice, and he went down hard. The storm swallowed him. He tried to rise, failed. Panic surged. Willow reached the fence and stopped. The memory pulled at her, tight and sharp. She turned back. She chose him. She pressed her body against his, shielding him from the wind. She grabbed his jacket and pulled, again and again. Together, they reached shelter. When the storm finally eased, they stood breathing hard, alive. Caleb rested his forehead against her neck. "You stayed," he whispered. And this time, he knew it wasn't just him who had made that choice. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the land quiet and pale. Snow covered the ranch in a clean, fragile layer that made every sound sharper. Caleb woke stiff and sore inside the barn, the smell of hay and cold air grounding him. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he felt the steady warmth beside him. Willow stood close, head lowered, one ear turned toward him. She had not moved far during the night. When Caleb shifted, she leaned slightly, as if checking that he was still there. "I'm up," he said softly. They stepped outside together. The sky was clear, washed clean by the storm. Fences lay bent in places, and drifts pressed hard against the barn walls. But the ranch was standing. Caleb breathed deep. The panic that usually followed moments like this never came. By mid-morning, a truck pulled into the drive. Linda Perez stepped out, eyes scanning the damage, then settling on Willow standing close to Caleb's side. "You look like you had a rough night," Linda said. "We managed," Caleb replied. She studied Willow longer this time, the way she stayed near, the way she watched him instead of the open land. "That wasn't fear keeping her here," Linda said quietly. "That was choice." Caleb nodded once. They talked through the next steps. Temporary foster status. Vet oversight. Monitoring. Linda's tone had shifted. Less warning. More acknowledgement. "You showed up," she said as she handed him the paperwork. "That matters." After she left, neighbors arrived. One truck, then another. Posts, wire, hay. No one made speeches. They worked. Quiet hands. Familiar rhythms. Willow watched them calmly, accepting their presence without fear. Miguel helped Caleb tear down the old fence by the draw. The post came free with a dull groan. Caleb laid it down gently. Willow sniffed the disturbed ground, then stepped away. "It doesn't get to be here anymore," Caleb said. That evening, when the last truck left, Caleb stood alone at the edge of the pasture. Willow walked out into the open snow, free and unhurried. She stopped, turned, and looked back at him. He waited. She came back. Inside the barn, Caleb pinned the old note to a clean board. Beneath it, he placed a blank sheet of paper. He stared at it for a long time. The fear rose, then passed. He picked up a pen and wrote 2 words. "I stayed." Willow stepped forward and pressed her shoulder gently against his side. Not a demand, a decision. Caleb rested his hand on her neck, steady and warm. Outside, the ranch settled into evening. Snow melted slow from the eaves. The land breathed on. The unbelievable part was not that she saved him. It was that when she could finally leave, she chose not to.